trusted the source. I trusted my own consciousness.
Yes.
I trusted from the existence and the eternalness from where we sprang. I came to trust that existence itself, the all and all, is in it for me, not against me, which is sort of what we got ourselves sold on. It's us as individuals versus the universe. Cool. All right, I got my Lions paraphernalia on, ready for next week. A little early, I might have to wash it between now and then, at least once.
You have your Lions hoodie on.
I do.
The Lions are going to be playing the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, not the Redskins.
Well, the name I thought of when they discussed what name should they change to, because, Native people felt like, that's an old term and it's kind of a put down and, really. And the owner, kind of resisted for a while and then, okay, sometimes there's cultural shifts of awareness that calls for changing terminology. It's not a matter of right and you've been wrong and we are right and you should feel guilty for saying redskin for decades. And so, no, it's about, rising sensitivities. And cultures change, and thus our lingo changes. Notice how much of our talk is influenced by electronic, lull, and I remember the first time, what's lull? Laughing out loud, stupid. Okay. So now do we say lull, why laugh out loud? Why not just say lull? It's quicker.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But anyway, and I thought, why not the Washington Warrior? Not plural, singular. Because it reminds me of Stanford Cardinal, their football team, not Cardinals. And I thought warrior. Warrior still refers to Native people, warrior. In the shadows of the Pentagon, warriors, Washington, political warrior. And then we have this trisyllabic commander. I don't know,
I think it's Washington State, though. Or no, is it
No,
Washington, D.C.? The Washington Redskins are Washington, D.C.?
It used to be.
Oh, it did?
Used to be, yeah. NFL, Washington Redskins, yeah.
There we found the boundary limit of my NFL knowledge.
Language. One of the qualities of our tendencies, human beings, is to, and I think I'm using the right term, but I might be smashed. No, it's the wrong term. Reify. In other words, language is not considered just a reference, a handy way to refer to something. All language is metaphor in that sense. But it is it. And, it becomes like idify the language. So if I say, boy, you're really stupid, if I idify that, I lock my brain and lock into the idea that you're stupid. If, on the other hand, I'm kind of humble and self-aware, I might consider the word in a more immediate metaphorical sense, that it is not so much about your intelligence or not, it's my reaction, my peak, my anger, my frustration, or you aren't getting me, or you aren't getting what I want you to get, so... language is as language does. And research has shown, I'll finish with this point, the impact of something is not so much what we say, and research more or less says about 20%. The impact is what I say. 80% is how I say it. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So if I come to say, hey, Eric, I have a concern. I think we have a problem. Eric, what the hell? Come on, man. We are really, which is more inviting, which opens you up to say,
Well, one of my favorite things there, something that still gets a little bit of internal reaction from me with regard to that, is when somebody says words that on the surface seem non-threatening, but you couple it with their tone, and it's like, and all of a sudden you're looking at them like, what's happening? And then they come back at you and say, what? All I said was this, and they repeat to you the words that they said as if the tone meant nothing.
Yep.
Don't look at my tone.
Yeah.
Only listen to what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess I'll just stop reading
tone.
Everything else.
Tone matters more in the moment, because I've used a term before. The term is interoceptive beings. In other words, our bodies react first to any situation. It's body, emotion, and cognition. I mean, it happens very quickly. So the tone will hit your body first, and the tone will start creating an emotional response before your mind starts, defining and understanding and so on. A lot of us think that it's the other way around. We're thinking beings, and it begins with what I think. And then there are emotions accompanying what I think. And then finally the body kind of agrees with what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
No, it's the other way. And the book, The Extended Mind, really gets into that interoceptivity. The body awareness first, and then the emotions out of that, and then the cognition. And it happens very quickly. Yeah, and so...
I can tell you most certainly that sometimes I don't even pay attention to the words. I am being sort of an intuitive person. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I know what somebody is saying, but I tune into what's important. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, and that's the other things other than the words themselves. And I think the words are actually a very small part of communication. I was telling you about how, there was times that maybe it was a midlife thing. I would start to wake up with dread.
Yeah.
And no matter how many 35 years of working in myself actively, at least, and still you do everything to get rid of that, and I couldn't get rid of it, and until and I won't bury the lead, I recognized and truly, I don't know how to say the next level. I truly recognized, not just cognitively thought of it as a theory, but I truly recognized that the whole thing is working in my favor. The universe, the God, the world, the existence is working with me. Not against me.
Yeah, and that's a fundamental faith shift. I know I'm using the word faith, and a lot of people think, it's about religion. No. The way James Fowler, a faith researcher, puts it, it's a foundational sense of life. And from that foundation, how you lean into life. And instead of the reality, existence being against you, you suddenly shifted, whatever is involved in that reality is with and for me. And if that's my platform from which I live day in and day out, of course I'm going to be more forward, more courageous, more creative, more out there, engaging in whatever terms that fits my interests and talents and the needs of the moment. That's a fantastic shift. That's no small thing.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. It was just time, I guess. And it's a shift from it's hard to describe. So, whatever narrative word you want to use, because I use lots of them, but God or the light is the simplest term to put it in. Although I try not to bring out the big G word so often. But so it is a shift for me to really, truly. I want to close this door for potentially save us some sound editing issues later.
Okay.
Where was I going with that? So, yeah, it just shifted. I was just finally convinced. I think, I don't ever think that there's. I mentioned a couple weeks ago about how in the past I was looking for the right religion or the right politics. What's the right one? I don't know. I guess I'll have to weigh the options. And but it ended up that I just kept weighing options on things like those through continued study. And then when you do that, you start to see that it's not about the right one, it's about looking at the different perspectives.
Okay.
Did I do something wrong?
Something happening?
No, I think we're good. But anyways, all I'm saying with that is that the most recent narrative that's working for me was looking into some Kabbalah pretty heavily for a couple of weeks.
How did that help you?
The
Kabbalah
narrative,
mysticism.
Yeah, the narrative hit properly. It hit in a way that I hadn't heard it before. Now, I had studied Kabbalah. I bought some back then was CDs. I think we were past cassette tapes at that point, like mid 2000s or so. I bought some CDs while I was in Miami. I stopped at the Kabbalah Center. That was my only introduction to that thus far. And I listened to the program. It was definitely intriguing, interesting stuff. But and I remember liking it at the time, but it didn't stick. It wasn't something I just stuck with. It just kind of.
Yeah, my observation is that that kind of sophisticated mysticism requires a certain degree of maturity, life experience, maturation of one's emotional, cognitive, even life working capacities.
Yeah.
But can you kind of touch on or remember some key expressions or concepts from the Kabbalah that seem to have led to this fundamental existential shift from dread?
And it seemed to have led to the shift from dread. Well, okay, so but before, because I get thinking this in the back of my mind, I was meaning to make sure that we get to, if you wanted something to focus on is like that.
Yeah,
I meant to ask you before I even pressed record, but I can edit this part out.
No, this is
fine.
Yeah, this is fine. I come with things on my mind, but it's not like an agenda. Like, we got to talk about this.
Okay.
I have some awarenesses and they're kind of like, maybe if it seems appropriate or helpful, for our conversation, but to the point that it's also helpful to listeners, that may be tuning in and getting something of value from our conversation. But so the word that comes to mind is from dread to trust.
Right.
Capital T. You trust that life is going to work with you. You trust that the dynamics of the universe, I mean, New Age theology, if you will, New Age thinking, leans into that sort of sense that if you have a positive, receptive attitude, a fundamental attitude toward life, it will work positively with you. And you have to also give to it. It's an interactive, it's a relational dynamism, to live in trust. It's also a relational dynamism to live in dread. We continue to feed the dread with fear fantasies, holding back, projecting negative interpretations on everything, So we humans are very good at developing rationales for our own stucknesses.
Yes. And, when we talk about things like that, it's like, this is how we act. But which actually, not that you mean it this way, but it makes me think that in our just sort of shallow unconscious, that we sort of believe that we really have control over it, but it's just we choose to do it that way. And I don't think that that's the case. I think we have a process that we have to go through, that it necessitates the change that was intended by whatever you're going through.
If we have sort of a platform of dread, live in fear, I mean, we are vulnerable. And working out west with a spiritually oriented psychiatrist, Dr. David Berenson, for a few years, he talked about the existential dread, or another word for it in German, and it kind of sounds like an angst, anxious angst. What's going to hit me next? What's going to undercut me next? And who's going to pull out the rug from under me next? It's kind of weaving kind of a pessimistic cloud on life.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I started. Good luck editing this one. So what I started to say is like, yeah, it almost seems like there's a willpower there, but I don't think that there is at all. But I start to understand, okay, so here's what I'm trying to say. I'll just say it outright, is that I can see how that dread motivated me. I use it as a motivation. Now you might say, well, you didn't use it, God used it. And that's true, but me and God, we did it together.
Okay.
So it was a motivational factor in the same way that I see, abusing alcohol. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to get to new levels of consciousness within myself, that I was able to get, to push me. It pushed me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we're talking about like, what was it with Kabbalah? It wasn't Kabbalah. It was me coming to a place where there is this sort of ripening the fruit. And that was the narrative that I used, that worked for me in that moment.
Yeah.
And but it facilitated, I guess one thing would be trust. It's like, like the concept of gaslighting and how you can change somebody. There's like a convincer pattern that people become convinced after, being told so many times this one thing in different ways, they become convinced.
That's right.
So there's some aspect of that.
You can repeat a lie thousands of times and people begin to believe the lie.
Yeah.
The convincer dynamic. Yep.
Then there's that aspect of this just So, with regard to faith, especially in a culture that's built up towards the opposite, which is an interesting story I was looking up in itself, because our story, the story of spirituality and science being mutually exclusive, I picked out another part of that puzzle that I really only have the surface of, but that has to do with, Isaac Newton and the rise of modern science and Newtonian physics, and the church, and as that began to rise, the church and science becoming at odds and deciding to sort of go their own way, which sort of created this mutually exclusive thing that it's either that left the public to decide, well, you can either believe this or you can believe this, but science decided to stay out of the invisible.
Sure,
and into materialism. So especially in the Western world, we decide, a good lot of us, I think, around here, though faith-based, became also materialistic, as far as consciousness arising out of material as opposed to the other way around. And material as being the fundamental nature of reality, as opposed to like the opposite of that would be panpsychic or panpsychism, which is consciousness as being the underlying fundamental nature of reality, is the consciousness, and out of that arises the matter.
Yeah, that's a meta-philosophical view, understanding. Some people might use the word pan-intelligence, that there is a subtle intelligence that doesn't run the show, but facilitates a process, and guides the process towards some kind of results that fulfills a certain purpose. But I understand what you're saying. I mean, I get that. The way I like to think about it is, and I think I've made reference to prior sessions, the wheel of consciousness, the 360-degree wheel of consciousness. We have different forms of consciousness, different ways of thinking. My computational thinking when I'm doing taxes is very different from when I sit on a keyboard and start just playing tunes creatively in the moment. Both are forms of consciousness, which is right. Well, I think computational consciousness is proper when I do my taxes. And artistic consciousness is proper when I'm sitting at the keyboard, ready to be inspired to finger some sensible rhythms. Reflective consciousness, when I go deep into thinking about things, versus, empirical consciousness, like, oh, I've got a problem here. I can't pay these 3 big bills right now. So problem solving, and you referred to, the split between, I'll call it religious consciousness and scientific consciousness. And modern theology has so gotten beyond that duality, as a serious problem, as a split.
Okay.
One of the expressions that was used, I learned this from, several theologians when I was in theology school, in my early graduate student days. God of the gaps. Meaning, what science can't explain, we throw in the God word, and we explain it, in kind of through religious terminology, And then when science begins to explain something, then it's sort of like, makes the God gap smaller. And more science, less God. More science, less God. And of course, the way Dietrich Bonhoeffer put it, instead of thinking of the God of the gaps, think of the sacredness in the very center of life. That there is a sacred, transcendent dynamic in the very center of science, in the very center of the different forms of consciousness. Okay? So I can think empirically as a scientist. Then in the evening, I can do Buddhist meditation and go deep into a transcendent frame of mind. And then later in the evening, I can look at my partner and say, hey, do you want to do some fun in the bed? Yeah, let's jump. I can have different forms of consciousness that day and enjoy my body in different ways. And it's not, wow, some is religious and some is material and not religious. No, the material is not anti-spiritual. The material is part of the multiplex universe that has features that are weaved together for the mystery of existence. So, and one of the ways that I think this anti-materiality or opposition to the material versus the ethereal or the religious, is regards how we have thought about the body, embodiment over the years, and there are philosophies, and in the early Christian history, there was a form of understanding the human that both the Hebrew community and the new rising Christian community took opposition to, and that was Gnosticism. Meaning that the human being is essentially a spiritual being, and our bodies are kind of an unfortunate encumberment. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could just float out of my car and not only be driven by an AI, but float from place to place as an AI? It's kind of like, oh, I want to get rid of my body. I don't want to drive my car. I don't want to even drive my body. I just want to be some kind of angelic bubble. I'm kind of overstating it, but, being silly.
I get you.
But you know what I mean. And if there's anything that's part and parcel of our spirituality and our soulfulness, it's our body life. Embodiment. In fact, the extended mind people, the science has been around like 20 years or whatever, but it's really taking off lately. And that is our whole body thinks. Our whole body is part of our mind life. Mm-hmm. And our whole body is also part of our spiritual life. And in fact, that was one of the things that I wanted to touch on. I was thinking kind of ahead of time and anticipating our getting together today.
Sure.
And one of the sources of really good, thoughtful material, I get it once a week. It's called A Marginalian by Maria Popova. She is brilliant and a creator of weekly, thoughtful writ to make us think. And in this last one from the other day, she made reference to the body. And, if you don't mind, I'd like to just touch on this just from her script.
Sure. What's her name?
Maria Popova. Popova. Margin, alien, A-L-I-A-N. Margin, okay. Alien. Margin, alien.
I got you.
And so, the hot shower, this is the title of the subsection. The hot shower as uncommon prayer. Now, any listeners to this, do you enjoy a hot shower? I love showers. I don't like baths because I feel like the dirt is just floating back to me. Where shower, oh man, the running water, and it, restores my dermis, and there are times I just stop and I meditate, and I let the shower just, go on my back, and I feel the aliveness. In fact, well, we are 70% body, water.
Yeah.
The planet is 70% water.
Yeah, bath almost seems like something you take after a shower.
Yeah. As a kid, bath was fun because I could play with duckies and I could play with boats and I could play with bubbles.
Sure.
But one of the paradoxes of being alive, she writes, is that it is often through the extremes of sensation, through the shock of having a body, that we come most proximate, and get this, to the subtleties of the soul. Walt Whitman knew this, and here's a quote. If the body is not the soul, what is the soul? William James, the spiritual psychologist around the 1900s, knew it, and he's quoted, a purely disembodied emotion is a non-entity. It goes back to this interoceptivity. Our lives are embodied lives, and we have, embodied cognition. We have situated cognition. Our bodies are situated in a space, and the space accommodates the body-mind process. And also the distribution of our two minds. Cognition is shared, okay? So, you and I know it perhaps daily, she writes. Few things ensole us more readily than a hot shower. And then she shares a prayer from a guy named Brian Doyle. She calls him the patron saint of the miraculous. And apparently, he wrote a book, and get this title, Book of the Uncommon Prayer, 100 Celebrations of the Miracle and Model of the Ordinary. So, here is a prayer in celebration of the wicked hot shower. O God, help me bless my soul. Is there any pleasure quite so artless and glorious and simple and unadored and productive and restorative as a blazing hot shower? When you really want a hot shower? When you are not yet fully awake, when you are wiped from 2 hours of serious basketball, when you are weary and speechless after a trip or trauma? Thank you, inventiveness, capital I. Thank you, inventiveness, for making a universe where there is water and heat and nozzles and towels and steam and hairbrushes and razors for cutting that line that distinguishes your beard from your chest and toothbrushes. Thank you most of all, generosity, capital G, for water. Deft invention is water. Who would have ever thought to mix hydrogen and oxygen so profligately? Not us, but it is everything we are. It falls freely from the sky. It carries us in our toys and joys. It is clouds and mist and fog and sleet and breath. There is no sweeter, more crucial food. And so, amen.
Very nice.
Yeah. To me, a symptom of people being over material at the expense of the spiritual, as you and we talk about often, is the fat obesity problem. It's a symptom. 70% of Americans fit in the category of being fat and or obese. Or another way to look at it, around 40% are obese. Now, that's a psychiatric problem. That's a mental health problem, not just a physical health problem. and in part, I interpret that as being the result of the disdain of the body. Yes, also the food industry and all of that. And Michael Pollan has written some good books about that, calling out the food industry for feeding us a lot of what I call SSF, salt, sugars, and fats. And I love salt, sugars, and fats.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a recovering foodaholic. The first 12-step program that I actually joined before AA, some years before that, was OA, Overeaters Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized that I was not eating healthily. I was eating for emotional reasons. I was eating to work out psychic stuff indirectly, And when I got in tune with, the idea that, eating is for ministering to the body, eating is for enjoying the body, but also empowering the body. And there are ways to eat spiritually and eat healthily and eat optimally. And then there are ways to kill ourselves by how and why we eat.
Yeah, actually, this plays into a different perspective. And you were asking about what was it that was different now.
Mm-hmm.
Just a side note is that it's interesting. You want to give credit where credit's due from where you study things, but also there's a recognition over the years. Like, back in the day when I first started getting into this or that or the other, I was just like every other doe-eyed kid. Let's just, not to say it disparagingly in any way, but just referring to myself, is that you just sort of fall into the next big thing, and that becomes the everything. And this is how, this is the thing. Mm-hmm. And you just, you can just sort of ignorantly succumb to whatever something is telling you and just ignorantly. Mm-hmm. So as far as like with overeating, that was what we were after. So with overeating,
or miseating as well.
Miseating, sure. And I can tell you how I've misused food and drugs and sex and shopping and just about pretty much everything. Just this particular narrative is working for me, is that, fundamentally in the beginning of the universe, and if time is an illusion, then it's happening right now also. It's just fundamentally at the core of the universe, is that when sort of the one, the concept of one, and the best way that we can understand it, sort of split into two, and it had the masculine and the feminine, and it is the giver and the vessel, the light and the vessel, essentially. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of this the beginning of the story of that Kabbalistic approach, something to this effect. And so you as the vessel are meant to receive, as we all have masculine and feminine. We all have giver receiver energy at the
we
fundamental.
Have both, all of us.
Yeah. And but as the vessel, as the receiver, we sort of go, okay, hey, God, this light is wonderful that you give me, but then you get what they call bread of shame. It's unearned light or unearned energy. And so this is wonderful, but I want to be like you. I can't, I both want to share what you're giving me, and I don't want you to give me anything in an unearned way. So I want to be able to earn what you're giving me.
Earn, that can be a tricky word.
Well,
or it's almost like, I'm not saying you mean this, but sort of be good enough or merit that somehow. Earn it. You earn the privilege. You merit it. Versus earn in the sense of being receptive to the givenness of it.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I mean is this, is that earn versus steal. So now you draw the drapes and say that I'm going to earn this because I'm going to learn to be like the creator, like God, and channel this energy effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I'm saying. Just like the sun wants to give you its light, the light of your source, whether it be, you know, a deep inner source of consciousness, or the light of a creator, or God, or chi, or prana, it is there in infinite abundance. It wants to give to you that light, and we sort of shut it out. But we've shut it out because we're still trying to work out the details of being a giver and a receiver, and sort of earning that light in their terms. So what we do, the concept is that we turned away from the light, and because we need that light, it's always what we're looking for, is that, but we try to steal it. So we steal it in terms of getting a quick hit from sex, or getting a quick hit from thought patterns.
Okay.
Or from food, you know, the minute, so now the minute we feel hunger, we run to the fridge. Now, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily craving from stress, or maybe we are, but they don't even have to be craving from stress. It's just like, I feel hungry, boom, I got to go get food. That is reactivity to our lower nature.
Okay. Okay.
As opposed to saying, oh, okay, so the body needs food. Now I'm going to, you know, I'm not going to go get any junk food. I'm going to prepare a nice meal to nourish the body in the name of, again, I don't like to turn it into a religious thing, but in the name of bringing light into the body. You know, in the name of bless this food, is brought in by God or the Creator.
Well, we are energy receptors. You know, the universe is constituted by energy, connectivity, and form. And we are energy connectors and transformers. And it's happening right now between us, in terms of the words between us. Some people might think, as I'm talking, my words are like baseballs, and your ears are like baseball mitts, and you collect my words, and then your brain processes what you have collected. That's not what's going on. This is an energy transformation process. I'm just blowing. I'm just blowing toward you.
Well, that's the fundamental idea behind materialism.
But the breath goes through vibratory chords, and those vibrations is what I'm sending to you. I am encoding meaning. I'm trying to say something meaningful to you. And your ears receive these vibrations, and then you decode what I'm saying. This is an energetic event, you know, and what I'm understanding you to say, part of the magic is to be receptive to the real energy of it. And I get what you mean by steal. And I like that. I like that contrast. One of the ways that I've heard it in the 12-step community, AA, is instead of turning to a legitimate higher power, we go to lower powers, substitutionary powers. You know, like you said, instead of seeking fulfillment in a deeper, holistic, spiritual way, we go for the quick fix, the quick sex, you know, the quick drug hit, the quick purchase, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of sorry, you got me into a trigger word, higher power, but
you don't like that expression.
Oh, well, okay, so it's lost a lot of energy, but
it's a way of talking,
right? Because the problem is that it created a conflict for me. Is that there's this is that two questions come up: is who are you that has a higher power? And then if God is one, if all are one and one is all, which is fundamental to my recognition or understanding of the universe, then how could there be anything higher than the other? And so it creates a sense of hierarchy and therefore separation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see that I can see that I have an internal program that sort of shuts off the circuits as soon as I hear the word still.
Yeah. And again, language is as language does. We are narrative creatures.
Right.
We make sense and we think in terms of making sense of things by way of words, narratives.
Yeah.
Did that do something to this?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I just realized I have an appointment in 15 minutes. I double booked, so I should probably call him really quick.
Oh, please. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
by all means.
disregarded the whole, podcast recording thing. So I have to slate.
How ironic.
Yeah.
Given what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you were sharing in part what, why the expression higher power has become problematic for you.
Well, I mean, to be clear, it not that it's become.
And that's not a judgment. I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm just saying.
No. I just want to be clear that it's not become a problem for me. That it was something of a trigger in the past that I had to work through, and it's still it's not become a problem for me so much as it just gets me thinking and disengaged. I still go off into a thought process.
Yeah, and I understand what you said. Narratively speaking, if oneness characterizes the essence of the structure of the universe, how can there be higher and lower if it is oneness? But another view that I ascribe to from theology and philosophy is the interplay of unity and diversity. In fact, interestingly, there is a theologian, a Euro theologian from the mid-20th century, McQuarrie, and he said, one of the marks of the influence of the sacredness upon a community, the sacred benevolence, the sacred empowerment, the sacred supportiveness that a community feels and adopts has two qualities, unity and diversity, meaning the richer the unity, the more extended is the diversity. And so they are, it's kind of like a yin-yang kind of thing. And when you have diversity, you can have distinctions of higher and lower, more intense, less intense, further, closer, etc., etc. Living richly, in my spiritual experience, is to always have a sense, like you're saying, of that inherent oneness of existence, and yet the multiplicity of it, the diversity of it. And even ourselves are diverse mind, body, spirit beings, and yet we are one, but three, if you want to kind of put it that way. We are in some sense, our soul is like a trinity. The mind, body, spirit interchange. It's one on the one hand, but it's all to multiplex. There's a multiplicity to these features, mind, body, spirit, on the other hand.
Mm-hmm.
So unity and diversity.
Sure. So that Trinity comes into play in a lot of things. Like, a light bulb it's nice to have a positive and a negative pole, but it doesn't do much until you put a filament between the two
said.
poles.
Yes, thank you.
Fire and water, for instance, two basic elements, and not from a periodic table of elements, but, elemental forces. And together, they don't really seem to mix. But if you put a pot between them, then they mix quite well. So
it's interesting that there needs to be this facilitative in-between element to make things happen. And that does touch on, you could say, some of the dynamics of the Trinitarian understanding of Christian theology, which is work I've done for many, many years of research on, and have a grip on, an understanding of, a working understanding. And I've said it simply before, our experience of sacredness as human beings has three distinct yet interrelated aspects. One aspect of our sense of the sacred is that it's higher than us, higher. Or Rudolf Otto calls it the numinous, creates a sense of awe and respect for life. Life itself is deeper or higher than me, So the sacred beyond, the sacred more than. And then you have, that's called transcendence, a sense of transcendence. And then you have the sense of immanence, the within, the spirit within, the inspiration within, the light coming within, But there is a third element that, like you were saying about filament and the light bulb, it's the relational. Martin Buber, the philosopher, calls it the spirituality of the between. The relational sense of transcendence brings the inner and the outer, the inness of sacredness and the outness of sacredness together. It's a relational sense. And that's, I think, comes natural to human beings. That's why there are religious systems, because the human being by nature has a sense of transcendence of existence, and yet a sense of the immanent sacredness of existence, and then a relational sense, the I-thou, as Martin Buber puts it, or the spirituality of the between. So I don't know how these words are coming across. When I sometimes talk to people about this, I have a whiteboard and I make markings and,
Yeah, and now you're scared to say words because of my trigger word, higher power. No, I commend you for owning that. I wish more and more people would be honest about narratives that turn them off. Yeah. And narratives that turn them on. Well, there's another word, religion. And I definitely got this from childhood. I didn't come up with this on my own. Religion is another trigger word. I see it as a distortion at a fundamental level. Even if cognitively I might certainly have other more well-rounded, holistic meta perspectives as far as the nature of these things and why they were necessary for culture and to keep order and things like that over time. At a deep unconscious inner child-ish level, without getting too picky about details there. There is this sort of remembrance of religion. Ew, that's what, so teenagers say, ew, religion. But at the same time, wanting to be like, oh, but I'm spiritual,
Right, SBNR, spiritual but not religious.
Right.
Which characterizes so many people today. In other words, they are saying no to institutional and historical and traditional religious systems. They just don't mean anything. They don't speak to me. They don't touch me. They don't touch my heart, my soul, my being in any meaningful way. And yet, we are spiritual beings, mind, body, spirit. So, it's almost like trying to turn off thinking and reading something once in a while to get through life. You can't turn off thinking and be a human being. You can't stop occasionally. Well, if you're illiterate, that's a whole nother problem. But you can't stop not receiving words to guide you every day. Well, religions are, and this is very controversial for any theologian of a particular persuasion to say, religions are relative. They are relative human constructions, yes, in response to a sense of inspiration of the sacred, touching people in a certain way. And so what religion does is organize the community around fundamental shared convictions of what the transcendence is. And they have an experience, and they share a narrative. And experience and narrative is a whole tricky business in and of itself.
Well, so I feel like you're talking about idealistically. That's what it's for. But because of egoic power structures.
Well, because it's a human construction.
Yeah.
Ego and power structures and games and distortion and, nationalistic Christianism, for example.
Right.
Putting political entities and Jesus in bed together. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, that does not work. That does not work. I am an ascriber of the wonderful experiment of constitutional principle of the separation of church and state.
Okay, so there's a hot one that it just came up to mind. Sorry to...
I know we're kind of shifty.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, we're shifty, but maybe we'll save that for another time. But I just thought of the... I only have a cursory idea of this, that the Catholic Church or the Catholic Church follows the idea of... the ideas of Paul, the Gospel of Paul, who really preached in the opposite direction of Jesus in many aspects. And there's that sort of a narrative going around right now, because what happened was that the ideas that Jesus, the narrative is the ideas that Jesus was preaching way back when were in contradiction to the power structures at the time, but those power structures could use those words just twisted slightly, and meant to create idolatry of Jesus rather than an example of a life.
Yes.
And then these ideas of like, pray to me, and not to, alienate anybody. This is just a narrative I'm hearing going around, that this was, the way that things are laid out today was actually from Paul, not... He was the one that sort of took these things and put them into a, I don't know how to say it, but any simpler, but these words, the way they follow things today, are from him more directly than anyone else. Because they were able, the way he put it, you're more able to take the peace and love and turn it into something that can be abused.
And you attribute that to Paul?
I don't attribute it to Paul, but I've heard it multiple times, just as a narrative going around now.
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit lost in not experiencing that narrative as you are.
Okay. Well, I'll come in with more information next time on it.
There is a distinction between the letters of Paul, where he appropriates in his view as coming from his Jewish background, but then experiencing what he calls the Christ, and instead of being an enemy of the Christian community, or the Hebrew community turning to become, quote, Christian, unquote, and instead of arresting and stoning people who were turning away toward this new brand of following the way of Jesus. He became an apprentice and a devotee and a disciple of the way of the Christ. There is a distinction to be made between the four Gospels and the letters of Paul. Of course, they interface, but Paul highlights certain things about, what the Christian understanding and conviction means for human communities in his setting, in his time.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a link in the description to one of the sources that I got for this that's pretty comprehensive. But yeah, I think the idea was that Paul never actually met Jesus. Not that I would have any reference to that whatsoever, other than hearing that Paul never met Jesus, and he was saying that, he is channeling the Christ consciousness, which I can understand that point of view, but he was twisting everything in order to be self-promoting and cater to power structures.
Yeah, I'd have to see the material on that. Because I disagree with the way you put it. For example, he is very much embedded in the idea that the Christ dynamic is a communal dynamic. We are the body of Christ. You go to Romans, the 12th chapter. You go to 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter. And speaking of body, Paul uses the metaphor of the body for the Christian community, and that each of us have different gifts that we can offer for the well-being of the community. And for well-being to what? To administer the love of the sacred to humanity, to administer the love of the sacred, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to visit the sick and in prison, which of course Jesus is quoted to say in the Gospels. Do this and you are replicating me. Do this and you are one with our Creator as I am one with our Creator. So there's differentiation in Paul versus the Gospels as writings, but they very much overlap, but they are also different because Paul's context is different from the writers of the Gospel. Mm-hmm. Their context, yeah.
Okay.
It's a complex mix. And in that complex mix, I think people can pull out threads and weave a certain sub-meaning that might be a distortion.
Yeah. So, well, that happens all the time. But it seems like you might have some sort of because I have zero reference to this. I'm not a Bible studier, mm-hmm. In those type of ways, other than, mm-hmm. I've read the Bible here and there, type of thing. Right. And I come at that more from a mystical perspective. I could care less for the history, just to be completely honest.
Yeah.
As far as a literal reading, don't even care. However, but what I'm saying is that, not that we're even talking about that, but it sounds like there's something there, but it's just an interesting interpretation of that, of what you're saying. Not that it's not without merit of some sort.
Yeah, and when we have this kind of free-flowing discussion, we enter different narrative camps, so to speak. It's like suddenly we're in the kind of Christian biblical terminology camp, and then we might be in the psychological, psychospiritual terminology camp, and then maybe in metaphysics and esoterics, and then maybe more philosophical, and then analytical. So, well,
there's something somewhat endearing about that. It's like
it's kind of fun.
Well, it's like the idea of what is it, like the Kung Fu master that goes, "Oh, grasshopper." I'm pretty sure what they're talking about is the,
I missed that show. Oh my gosh!
Is the grasshopper mind, right? Is the idea that I think that I've heard that they're talking about that seems more plausible. He's talking about the mind that is untrained and unmatured, and it jumps from thought to thought to thought, and so. But I don't know. To some extent, that's relatable. But it is nice to stay on topic once in a while.
Yeah, you said train the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that I want to get a little bit back to the body.
Yeah.
And what people of the extended mind camp are suggesting is that what we need to do is to become more sensitive to our body life. And one of the ways we do this, and it's a meditative tool, I've used it in groups and singularly, is what they call a body scan, a mental meditative body scan.
Okay.
And what that is simply is, meditative breathing, slow, rhythmic, full. I think people have an idea what, rhythmic meditative breathing is like. Rhythmic and slower, fuller. And then you focus your mind first on the left leg, beginning with your toes. And you take a few breaths as you focus on your toes. And you let your mind develop whatever pictures it might, awarenesses, while you're focusing on your toes. Then your sole of your feet, and then your ankle, and then your calf, and then your knee, and then the upper leg. Then you go to the right leg and do the same, toe, sole, ankle, etc. And then when you go to the torso part, you go to your guts, or you go to your butt if you're sitting. Or you can, even if, so you think about, the gluteals, maximus, the minor gluteals, your butt, et cetera, et cetera. You go up your body slowly. And it couldn't, take, maybe 20 minutes or a little bit more or less, depending how slowly a person does. But it is really remarkable, the impact when one does it for the first time. It's sort of like reappreciating and falling in love with that which you are. It's kind of ironic, as you kind of objectify it through meditation, you're also relating to it, and you come to regard your body as an incredible, marvelous, magical, magnificent entity. Magnificent entity. And that can engender a profound respect. And then when you tune in, you can also become aware of maladies and resistances. And, so again, I am a devotee of, yes, training the mind, training the spirit, but also ministering to loving and training the body. And there are ways to eat that are healthy. It isn't just what we eat, but even more important is how we eat.
Mm-hmm.
And the three key principles that I employ that works from what I've learned from people, eating masters, so to speak.
Sure.
Gratitude. Don't have to necessarily say a formal prayer. Thank you, God, for this food. But take a moment and appreciate. Think it. This is true gift from the universe, from the planet, from growers, food collectors, food storers, food distributors, an army of natural and human resources, and the sacred resource of this salad in front of me. A salad with salmon in front of me. All right. So a moment of gratitude. Then eating mindfully and eating slowly go hand in hand. eating slowly. I take a bite. I put the implement down. Not, and before I swallow the next bite, I'm stuffing my face. Why slowly? Because food science has proven that whatever your size and type of body, if you give your body a chance, it'll be satisfied if you're eating normally in 21 minutes or so. I forget the exact 21.7 or 4 or whatever, but around 21 minutes. So in 21 minutes, I can jam 2 hamburgers of 1,800 calories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in 21 minutes, I can enjoy about half of my salad with a piece of salmon. You get the picture.
Sure.
And of course, people will say, well, yeah, there's no way you're going to be satisfied with a salmon and salad as much as you would with 2 quick burgers. That's not the case. If you sensitize your body, I'm not saying the salmon would be enough. One might say, I think I need a piece of whole grain bread with it.
Well, we're definitely overstimulated. Yeah. We're
material.
We're gluttonous in that way.
Yep.
And we sort of, that's again, I like, regardless of what words you use, there is the idea of like, where do you look for your energy from? Because we are receivers at nature. We need to receive energy.
Yes.
And so when I need to receive that energy, am I getting the light from the sun, or am I drawing the blinds and trying to steal it from you or from food or from whatever it is? And so I think definitely we're overstimulated in that way.
And I think that's where the whole attitude of gratitude. There's a theologian, her last name is Bass, and she has written a couple of books on gratitude. The gratitude implies gift, and food is a gift. My breath, this is a gift. You are right. We are energy receivers and energy transformers. And as a charismatic person, we receive sacred energy. We receive the energy of God's humanity. We incarnate God's humanity, but we also have creaturely humanity. And I know this sounds like a kind of a dualistic, it's not meant to be dualistic, but it's meant to make an important distinction that we are both. And that is our dilemma, as well as our magic. And Reinhold Niebuhr put his finger on it, an ethicist, a Christian theologian, was a pastor in Detroit. He did some cool things in Detroit. And he said, you know what the enigma of being human is? That we're a combination of soil and spirit. We're animal and we're spiritual together. I see us as kind of scattering the bread upon the waters out there. And my hope is that a piece here or a piece there might mean something to the listener, a morsel of significance to a thought, something you say and something I say. I'm aware that we're not like following a script and making sure we stay on a particular theme.
Well, that's good. That's actually how they do it today.
Yeah, I like the freedom we have and what comes to mind.
Not that I want to be a follower of anybody else. Sorry to interrupt your thought.
No, this is what we are sharing, our convictions, our thoughts, And but anyway, so I hope my emphasis on the body today was okay in some sense. I'm aware that in the very first session, before you even name my name, in the introduction, I spoke about mind, body, spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that triad very seriously. I have kind of a complex understanding, you might say, the architecture of our mind, body, spirit being.
Mm.
something developed some years back, and I still, affirm it.
This was something that you wrote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Chaplain Olaf.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Olaf. So, I mean, we didn't really get into it this time.
I didn't have my doctorate then.
Right. Right. Okay. We didn't really get into it this time, but I was reading through this, and there's some good, thought-provoking stuff in here.
And I was a spirituality director at Sacred Heart. I was under contract for. It didn't fill out a whole year, but
But what we're talking about is it's a spirituality workshop.
It's
towards spiritual anthropology.
Yeah, exactly. And different sources are behind this, that illuminated me, in over the years.
And it looks like that was 1990 that you were originally using that.
Yeah.
At a rehab center.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that you did in the past that works with rehab center. Apparently.
Yeah. Around 1990, I was in a position where I needed a new job. I needed a job, and what I found was, gifted with a half and half. A small faith community in southwest Detroit needed a half-time cleric, a half-time religious community leader, to do the stuff that religious communities do, weekly worship. But in this case, I must say, this church, which happened to be a Lutheran church, but the evangelical Lutheran, meaning kind of the moderate, liberal, conservative mix, and the meaningfulness of that half job was the fact that 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, they held a hot lunch for poor and homeless people. We would open with a prayer at 11:30. And then we would be open in the basement of this church with round tables, and people could come until 1 o'clock, and then, close the food line. That was quite an effort by a small church, garnering the resources to feed the poor. 3 hot lunches. And I loved it because we didn't kick people out at 1 o'clock. Let them hang and talk. Let them play cards, more or less for up to a couple of hours. And what I did was able to mingle with people, and say, hey, Olaf, come here. I got something to say. And here's a striking story. This one guy comes up to me and say, hey, Olaf, can we go aside? I don't want others to be aware of this. Oh, okay. So we go up the stairs, where a small office is. And he pulls out a gun and he says, will you keep this piece for me?
Oh, yeah?
And the way he handed it wasn't like I wasn't freaked out. He wasn't like his finger on the trigger, and he said, and I said, yeah, well, what's going on? He says, I don't trust myself. Yeah, this is legal, he said, but I don't trust myself. Well, I don't know if it was legal or not, but would you keep it for me? And I took it on face value, and I said, yeah, hey, I commend you. That if you really think you're not in control of this incredible, responsible weapon, kudos to you. I'll keep it, and mum's the word. Confidential. This is between us. Okay.
Sure.
And some people might say, oh, you were wrong. You should have given it over to the police, You build trust with people. You get into stuff like that.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, of course.
So that was half the job. And then someone made known to me, hey, Sacred Heart Rehab Center could use a spirituality director for the time being. It was temporary. It wasn't like a permanent position, kind of half-time. So the two halves fit together very well. And so I think it was like about 9 months, I worked at Sacred Heart Rehab Center in downtown Detroit. And now I think if that building were there, it would impose itself on Ford Field.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, the ghost of the center is in Ford Field. Yeah.
I've never, worked at a rehab center. I've certainly been in a few
Then I worked
on
one
the
in,
other side of them, but I do have a friend that
yeah.
works at one as a driver, and he mentioned that it's a good environment for you.
And then I also worked out in California for a little over a year as a spirituality director of a multi-level treatment unit, both psychiatry and addiction treatment.
Yeah.
And in working at El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California, they had a very powerful program, but they needed a spirituality director, someone who pulled this stuff together in a more coherent, workable way. So I gave them a system, a way they could work with spirituality that made sense, and that's very. And then I also co-coordinated the outpatient department. And this guy named George, he was a recovering hog riding beer-aholic, and George and I were a team in working with alcoholics and addicts in the outpatient kind of sector. And it was fun to work with George. He was really cool. And I'll never forget when he said to me, he said, Olaf, I get uneasy when religions kind of muck with the program. He says, I want AA meetings to just be AA meetings. I don't like it when religion is brought in. And I said, yeah, but the language of the third step, kind of leaves kind of a wedge on the door when it says, turn it over to your higher power.
So remind me, what's the third step?
We turn it over to the higher power.
Gotcha.
We have admitted I have a problem. I am powerless with that problem, step 2. Now I turn it over to a higher power, trusting that higher power. And I'll never forget when George said, Olaf, it is not about a religious higher power. The higher power that's implied is the rest of the steps. Your higher power is when you humble yourself to the treatment process of steps 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. You entrust yourself. Now, it doesn't have to be either or, and research has shown that a person's success in the 12-step healing framework is contingent on step 4, meaning it isn't enough just to say, okay, God, I'm turning over my drinking problem to you. I've stopped drinking for 2 weeks. I'm kind of cool, and I'm hoping, going to meetings. Okay, that's good. But where you really begin the healing process, step 4 is a deep, courageous, and searching inventory of my behaviors as I was an addict or alcoholic. And what people do is write 4 or 5 pages, typically, of what I did when I was a drunk or a drug addict, who I ripped off, what I did wrong. Write it all down. Write it all down. Face yourself honestly. Look in the mirror. And then step 5, talk to someone in the community, a recovering sister or brother, and read what you wrote. And people have done that with me, and when you are read to by someone reading their stuff, you don't comment and say, oh, that's good. Oh, no, you just, okay, And the only time you kind of interrupt the process is for clarity. Wait a minute, you wrote such and such. Are you saying, can you clarify? Oh, okay. And what a person experiences in step 4 and 5, for some people, they face themselves for the first time and what they really did. And to share it with another human being, that's a real breakthrough. Very important. But then step 6 and 7 are working on your character defects, working on yourself.
Right.
You know what? And there might involve counseling or life coaching or going to groups or group therapy, and then we get to the other steps, making amends, correcting wrongs when you can. Step 8 and 9. Step 10 is neat. Step 10 is where you do a daily inventory of your behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Was I a jerk today? How was I a jerk today? And we had a neat sheet in the treatment program at El Camino, a sheet of typical behaviors of alcoholics and addicts, getting angry, getting egotistical, etc., etc. And look through the list and check yourself off. I was okay today on that. I was okay today. Oh man. Yeah, okay. And then you have to ask yourself, is there something to correct here? Maybe the next day go to a friend and apologize and say, I'm sorry I flipped off on you. I was rude.
There's an unfortunate, there's some wonderful information there as far as the steps are concerned. But, there's an unfortunate, from my perspective, there's an unfortunate intolerance or inflexibility inherent in the AA processes. And just to put it simply, because institutions that don't evolve die.
Yeah.
And so, but to get my point out is that when you still want to continue to use words from whatever it was now 80 years ago, and languaging and thought processes with kids that are being born now, within the last 20 years, then it doesn't work. The same narratives don't work. The same thought processes don't work. And then, like I said, most of my friends are from programs, but I can't really go to programs because they can't tolerate how I speak. Because in the ones that this isn't me denouncing anything or promoting anything. Right. This is just my experience.
Yep.
Is that when I go in and speak how I speak, because I saw it as a way of talking about my experience in a way that I could only relate to other addicts, you get sort of shamed. Shame, don't talk about anything else except for our authorized list of things to talk about.
It reminds me of religious fundamentalism. I call it AA fundamentalism.
Sure.
Where you literalize the words. And you have a very narrow understanding of those words. And if you don't fit this literalistic, model or paradigm, you're wrong. You're not getting it. And you're absolutely right. I think the core principles in the 12-step process, in a sense, are logical, healing fundamentals of how to work out of addictiveness. But I'm not stuck to AA language. You can work with those steps in all kinds of varied ways, But the fundaments are there. Self-admission, I have a problem, laying it out what it is, sharing it with someone, working on oneself, and then staying vigilant to habit patterns. And then turning, and there is a spiritual step, step 11, and that's a kind of a controversial one. You pray to your higher power, excuse that term, but step 11 is you pray to your higher power to know your higher power's will for you. What is the messages of the universe for me? And have the ability to do it, So, I know someone who, in the later stages of his life, he's part of a faith community. He is working on becoming a professional comic, and he's at a kind of a lower level now, 10 minutes at cafes, local cafes, But he understands his comic role as a ministry, meaning a gift of laughter to get people for at least those 10 minutes to forget their problems, or forget themselves and just get into the modality of feeling the funnies and feeling the laughter. And of course, to me, laughter is an incredible medicine for the body. Laughter does so much for us physiologically and psychologically. So anyway, so your, step 11 has a religious connotation, but to me, it's a spiritual, explicit spiritual connotation. That's my spirituality, to make one more point on this, is not for my sake only. The spirituality is for the sake of others, because step 12 says, and I reach out to other suffering addicts and alcoholics. Mm-hmm. Step 11 is like, give me the capacity to do step 12, to reach out to other suffering alcoholics and addicts. Or one step 11 might be a research scientist praying that there will be good results from the research that can help people, let's say in the pharmaceutical industry, that kind of thing. So the 12 steps is kind of a philosophy of life. It's a framework for a philosophy of life. But you have to be very much unfundamentalistic to understand and accept what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, and I'm not. I almost don't want to promote it because there still is a little bit of a trigger there, because there was a lot of going to meetings and getting like raked.
That sounds like a bad group dynamic.
This wasn't just
one. This
was not just one group. Not even a little bit.
I've heard others say the same.
Yeah. So, but what I'm trying to get to is that there is a framework there. It wasn't created by AA, and everybody knows the stories about Carl Jung and Rosicrucians, maybe. I can't remember what the Christian group they got their ideas from, but therein lies what I'm trying to say, is that there is a good fundamental things that are saying actually the same thing that I'm talking about with regard to when we when you admit those types of things to God, another, and yourself, what you're doing is you're not coveting them any longer. You're not sort of hiding them away as like these shameful or guilty things, and you sort of hide them away. And then because, you're afraid to show them. That's not unique to AA, not even a little bit, but it's a nice, simple, almost scientific, step-by-step framework. I mean, they're called steps, but just a little bit of flexibility there could open the gateway and help so many more people.
Oh, yeah.
And so the
same thing with the religions, a little more flexibility and,
No, certainly.
Can help many more people. Rigid dogmatism does not help.
Most certainly.
And rigid dogmatism of AA, rigid dogmatism of religious systems. No.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's the inflexibility. I understand maintaining the integrity of something, which is why those things are built in. But in trying to maintain the integrity, you actually destroy the system.
Yep.
And and it's kind of like
over rigid. Yeah. And it breaks.
But and another is trying to is that you. Oh, I can't remember the exact parallel, but in the step, it's, you're going to, is kind of how we opened the conversation of me talking about Kabbalah and what that fundamental difference was of, waking up with, what would you call it? Existential dread. No matter, though I like to make sure and kick in the fact that I've made psychological and spiritual studies the main thing that I focus on moment to moment for decades now, and still have that going on. And the point, this isn't to say that I did anything wrong. The point was I got to this point where I trusted I trusted God. And
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
what
like using that word
No,
because it
that-
sounds
that-
religious, but
that's
I
what I say. And
trusted the
trust.
source. I trusted my own consciousness. I
Yes,
trusted
yes.
from the existence and the eternalness from where we sprang. I came to trust that the universe, that the more than that, more than the physical universe, the existence itself, the all and all, is in it for me, not against me, which is sort of what we got ourselves sold on. It's us as individuals versus the universe. And so, yeah, I guess that's where I was going with that. But
yeah. I mean, yeah. It again. I repeat myself. That story when I was riding on Paint Creek Trail on a bicycle,
yeah,
and on a picket fence, were in big capital letters these words: "I love you," and below that, life.
Right.
And like I told you, I literally stopped the bike. It came to a screeching stop. Got off the bike, walked back, and stared at that picket fence for a while, just meditating on that, and feeling waves of deep appreciation that is so.
Right.
And I felt deep gratitude that I felt that way. I know deeply what you're talking about when you talk about the difference between dread and trust.
Right.
It's death or life.
Right. Absolutely. And we're closing out here, but is that just tweak in inflexibility in our narratives or our systems, whether it be political or religious or whatever it is, and that makes the other guy seem so evil, which we just proved to ourselves with things like COVID. You're evil because you won't wear a mask. That means you don't care about people. No, actually, I can see right through it, and I see it as a government control thing, and I will not be party to it. That's the other side of it.
That's the other side of it.
Yeah, and so
Americans wanted to be able to choose which side they were convicted by and wanted to live by.
Well, the point was, though, is not that. Of course, that's always the case. The point is it showed our nature and that we are controllable right now because of our reactivity. Because we are reactive, and as soon as we feel threatened, we fall to our lower nature.
Yes,
we
of
have
course.
not, but that doesn't have to be the case, is what I'm saying.
You're right.
It doesn't have to be the case. We have to transcend that. We sort of have to.
Well, that's what this spiritual tools, spiritual art, spiritual science. This is where, practicable spirituality comes in. We're not just talking theoretical words. We are talking about dynamics of life that are subtle, that are sometimes kind of elusive seeming, and yet when we really think about it and talk about it sincerely and deeply, so fundamental to what it means to be a full human being, and what does it mean to be a full, you might say, satisfied, self-actualized human being.
Certainly.
That's what you and I, in our interest in spirituality and psychology and the interface, this is where we're coming from.
Yeah.
Helping humans to be fully human in a healthier, better way.
Well, absolutely.
And I'm continuing to learn and grow in it. As elder as I am,